I am with Jan Bunge. You're the CEO of Squint Opera. What is Squint Opera?
We are a business in London and New York, and our main focus is to help people communicate very complex and very difficult urban projects. So we started only focusing on the built environment, communicating large master plans or helping cities to express their visions for the future. And by now we have grown into other areas. So we also, since 6-7 years, do a lot of work in the cultural context, working with museums and large exhibitions.
We can say you're a digital agency, a design agency?
Yeah, the Squint Opera is not an agency in a classical sense. We are more a creative studio and a production house in one. So we come up with the ideas, but we also make them. So we're 100 people, thinking and making at the same time.
What your name? What does mean your name? Could you explain us your Squint Opera? What does it mean?
There's no great narrative I have to explain the name, but there's a funny story. I once had a client who was very annoyed with the fact that we don't have a good explanation for our name, and she once emailed me that they did an internal workshop to figure out why we are called Squint Opera. And their conclusion was that we are called Squint Opera because what we create makes you want to look really carefully and focus. So you're squinting your eyes, and there's always it's always emotional, and that's the opera bit. So I cannot go with that explanation.
Okay, and how do you promote today urban spaces?
So if you look at the we are very much in the business of helping to communicate future scenarios for urban spaces, and this is a very lengthy process and very different in different countries. But in principle, our mission is divided into different stages. So at the beginning, it's really only about helping to figure out what the proposition is. Before you have a project, it's all about what is the need and what is the vision and why is it different to what others are doing next to you, and so our work in the beginning of these projects is often just to facilitate a conversation and help people articulate what it is that they're trying to do. And once this is articulated and clear, then the next step in most scenarios is that you have to convince someone. So this often is either a government, or you have to convince a bunch of investors, or there's different groups that you have to talk to and convince that you have a good idea for this future development. But this ranges from the public, government bodies, or private sector clients that have to be convinced to either partner up or support the project. So at this stage, we look at the audience and we look at what it is you're trying to do, and then together we figure out what the best method is. So Squint Opera is not selling one product, but we are more becoming partners to figure out how you can succeed in this very complicated long process.
Are you interested by the Greater Paris? How do you consider this question?
I'm a trained landscape architect who went into urban design, and I changed my career and have been a director at Squint for the last 6-8 years. But Greater Paris is a really interesting case study, just because when the whole discussion started, there was a lot of buy-in, and there was a lot of interest, and there was a lot of international discussion, because the problems are the same all over the world. The problems that Paris are facing are very similar to any metropolis, at least in the Western world, and I find it very telling and interesting that if you would go back and look at all the great ideas that were developed in the early days of this initiative, I think none of them actually has come to fruition. Really, the last one just recently, got at least postponed, if not cancelled. So I think what this highlights is that at the core, I think the problem is a communication problem, because the urgency for us to build better places and better cities and be more resource efficient and be more sustainable and more socially integrated, and all these things we all have agreed. There's the UN Sustainable Development Goals that most nations of this planet have agreed to. So it's not a matter of not being aligned on in principle. In principle, we all want to create that. I would assume. Some tend to, more in this direction or that direction, but the core principle, I think, we are agreed on that things have to change and they have to improve. But I feel that, because it is such a complex process and there's so many stakeholders, and it is a very fragmented environment that you're operating in, because you have private forces and public forces, and you have the whole so many interest groups involved that really the most challenging bit, in my opinion, is yes, you have to have a great design, you have to have a great vision, but then you have to also be able to communicate this properly, and only if you manage to fully convince all the stakeholders, you will be successful with your project. Otherwise, it will come back and bite you.
And these points are the same all over the world? I
believe so. They're obviously different but it's more a human condition than it is because I believe that in general we are not we're not embracing change. Change always is firstly perceived as something negative and worrying, because we are creatures of habit, and we find comfort in repeating things that we know work and we have seen before and experienced before. And I think it's fair to say that in order to deal with the current climate crisis or the current social problems, things will have to change quite drastically for many cities, and in the same way that you would deal with a change in your personal life, you need to spend the time to discuss it and to work through it and look at both sides, and slowly you might be able to then do an experiment, and you try it out first, and then at some point it becomes a habit. But this is it's an intense process that just needs a lot of attention and careful kind of handling. And then in a city context, the problem is also, the added difficulty is that these are very long processes and very slow processes. And then stakeholders change, and interest groups change, and so it's a very dynamic process. There's not one solution, obviously, to get this right.
Thank you very much, Jan Bunge.
No worries. Thank you.